Today, I sat down with Senior Logistics NCO Sergeant First Class Robert Chadwick. Say that 10 times fast. On paper, this friendship wouldn't make sense to most, which is why we felt it totally made sense for us to have this conversation. Robert holds his Master's of Business Administration in Logistics and Supply Management, and he is currently pursuing a doctorate in Business Administration, which aligns perfectly well with what he's doing in the. He also works alongside his wife Jasmine as founder and creator of minority-owned and veteran-operated apparel company, Oyster Rock Apparel. Definitely check out their website down in the show notes if you need new threads. High possibility you will get to meet Jasmine on here at some point. In this episode, he answers my questions about the Army's inner workings, what makes an effective manager, and he drops some solid life advice for engaging in conversations with people who may not necessarily, and what you should do to make sure that your voice is heard in your community. As always, let me know what you think about this conversation. Give it a rating, hit subscribe so you never miss another episode. Share it with someone who you think might benefit. Check out the recommendations in the show notes and consider buying from Oyster Rock Apparel. You are listening to the Cornerstone Conversations podcast, where we invite and ignite mindful moments through education-driven, people-oriented, principled conversation. I'm your host, Chris Didion. Let's chat. So, how are you doing today?
Hey, technology is awesome.
I feel like, does the universe not want us to have this conversation?
I don't know. Maybe it could stop today. We don't know.
I think we're going to just do it. We're just going to have the conversation. Hope that the universe doesn't fuck this up. All right. So,
well, hopefully you got coffee.
No coffee. All water.
This is my second cup, and I've already done some research this morning. So
research?
For my class that I started on Monday.
All right, because you're a doc student. I was like, research? You researching for this interview? We're just having a casual conversation. No. I'm not going to attack you.
Yes.
What's your official title?
I am a senior logistics NCO.
And what does that?
First class.
And what does that mean?
So I handle all logistics for a battalion element, and what we do is each company, when we do operations, we make sure they have enough food, water, bullets, equipment, and those things, and we ensure that they are tracking the equipment and the maintenance of the equipment and whatnot to ensure its operability for sustainment.
So, did you always want to be in the Army? I feel like that's not the glamorous part of the Army that the media shows, where everyone's like overseas and on the front line.
No. Actually, no, I never wanted to be in the Army, to be honest. So it was June of 98, between my junior and senior year. My brother wanted to join the National Guard.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the Army Reserves. My twin brother, and he's also in the military, same rank, same job. Mm-hmm. He had a recruiter come by, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Nothing." And he was like, "Hey, you can get us money to go to college." And my parents really couldn't afford college, so I was like, "Okay." So I took this the ASVAB, but it's like a practice test.
Mm-hmm.
So I took the test. He was like, "Oh, you scored pretty good. You can join the Army, blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "Okay." And then joined the Army.
And that's it.
Yeah, I did it for the college money, and then I stayed in for, it's been 21 years.
21 years. How common is that, though, that people just join for either college money or perhaps they just couldn't afford it?
A lot.
A lot
of people join for college money, or they don't know what they want to do, but the military is they provide a job and they provide housing and all that good stuff. So it's a good place to go if you don't know what you want to do. Also to get experience.
Get experience in what?
Just in life and, working in this and that.
If you could go back, would you select a different branch?
Would I select a different branch? It's kind of a double-edged question because, yes, on the fact that I would choose the Air Force because they have better duty locations.
Yeah. Okay.
The way they treat their personnel is better. But I would stay with the Army because the Air Force leadership, from what I've seen working with them, doesn't take care of their soldiers on a personal level as well as the Army does. The rate of promotion for the Army is more vast because there's more personnel in the Army than there is the Air Force. So, your chances for promotion are very high. So, but the other good thing I do like about the Air Force is when you're promoted, they have a skills test that you take. So you have to know your job on paper and in person. Whereas in the Army, you don't really have to know, not saying you don't know your job, but you don't have to take a skills test. And you're based off potential instead of technically knowing your job proficiently.
Gotcha. Well, so do you think that's better, perhaps, to base it off potential, or do you think that they know you on a better level if they're I know the potential of this soldier, so I know that I can promote them based off that?
Yes. I think it's good. Yeah. But now, when you get to my rank, it's not at the local level anymore. You and I are working on a day-to-day basis. That goes. We have to submit a packet full of all of our military information, and then it goes in front of a board at the Department of the Army, and they pick from that. So they don't know you; they just know what's on paper. You have a picture, you have your military records, your what military education you've done, civilian education, yada yada. In your evaluations, because we get annual evaluations. So that's the only thing they know. They don't know you as a person. So on paper, you could be well, but you could be a crappy person, be a crappy leader. But if nobody does their paperwork to change your evaluations, you become not a problem with the system, but
Yeah.
I guess a problem with the system because no system's going to be fair when you're trying to evaluate, 4,000 people for 120 positions,
So you just mentioned evaluations. Are there more checks and balances in place for if, say, someone is doing a poor job or just treating those in their battalion poorly?
Yes, if it's put on paper. It goes back to, in every job, you're supposed to get counseled. Well, if you get annual evaluations, what we do in the military, we get supposed to get counseled quarterly on what we're doing, how we're improving, what we need to improve on for our civilian education, leadership, our job, training soldiers, just different things. And if that happens and they put it on paper every quarter, then at the end of the rating cycle, the evaluation will write itself. Right? Let's say if this person's doing a bad job and they put it in there, then they will know that this is what's happening. You give them a chance to correct it. But if they don't do those quarterly counselings, then they just write the evaluations because in regulation it says that, and I'm ad-libbing here a little bit, that you can't give a soldier a bad evaluation if you don't have that counseling to back it up.
Are there more?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, are there more regulations when you're in the Army versus outside of the Army?
Yes.
So do those tie your hands as far as, how I want to say this? So for instance, there are certain scenarios where you have to be wearing your uniform, and there's certain scenarios where you can't be speaking on certain things. Because I feel like, from what I've seen, there are a lot of people coming out and talking politically who are retired. When you retire from the Army, per se, are you still married to those regulations or no?
No.
And we saw this in the DNC and the RNC where they're former veteran from Vietnam, former Kuwait, and you're wow, they're really talking elitely. Do you think that being in the military gives a bigger voice to that or more weight?
Depends on who you're talking to. Depends on who's speaking and what audience they're trying to captivate. My personal opinion, I think it's just a ploy to get veterans to vote, Democrat or Republican. I mean, depends on your job, depends on your rank, because at my level, I don't see what goes on at the Pentagon or Department of Defense or those things, so I can't speak on, the political aspect of the military, what we call big Army. I can't speak on those things because I don't know those things. But, if you have a general or a colonel or whoever that worked at or it could be the White House or whoever, wherever they worked, they may have more insight than I would at the lower level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
I think a lot of times it's that they want to, people to vote one way, just like anybody, so they get this person to speak to sway voters, left or right.
Because I want to know your full opinion. I think on paper, like, this friendship wouldn't make as much sense, but that's why I think this friendship works, right? I feel like we're different as far as our views on most things, but we can have a full conversation about it. So when someone is called to serve, like, we don't have a draft anymore. So at this point, individuals who are serving in the military, it's their choice. Like, they enlist, they go through basic training, and then they sign that contract to stay in. You can retire at any time, correct?
20 years, active duty service.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
If you're in the National Guard or reserves, it's 20 years, but it's not, you don't draw your retirement because you don't do 1 week in a month or 2 weeks a year. Mm-hmm. So you don't draw your retirement until don't quote me, I want to say 65, just like a traditional retirement.
Gotcha.
So you don't draw it till you're 65. Now you can retire at, you joined at 18, you can retire at 38 from the reserves, but you can't draw retirement until you're 65.
Gotcha.
Now for active duty, once you do your 20 years of active federal service, you start drawing a pension right then at 50%. Now, in 2018, in January, it changed to more of a traditional retirement where you put in X percentage, the military puts in X percentage, and then once you leave the military, you can transfer it into a different fund or another IRA or whatever. So they kind of changed the way they did the retirement because they were spending too much money from a business standpoint. Because if you retire at 20 years, you get paid, let's just say, ballpark number, $2,000 a month times 24 months, that's $24,000 a year, and you can live to be, expected age of, say 40 years, $800,000 they got to pay out. Well, more than that because inflation and pay raises and all that.
Yeah.
Versus when you leave the service, that same rank at 20 years, they may have only paid you. I think the chart I seen was like $250,000. So does it make sense? No, but it makes sense from a business standpoint because you're paying out $250,000 from here versus $800,000 over the next 40 years with inflation and all that.
Do you think that goes into how they care more about personal and they're looking towards after you retire when you're not in active duty?
How do you mean?
So how you were saying before that caring more on a personal level, do you think that a part of that caring more on a personal level is understanding that you're not going to be in active duty forever and thinking forward as far as like, okay, when they retire, let's make sure they're taken care of?
Maybe, but I don't think that's. I think that's a small part of it. I don't think that's a big concern, to be honest. But we do have the VA, and you do have TRICARE for life once you retire, which is really good for health insurance. I think it's just to get people to stay in past 20 years because, the average person doesn't stay in. Like when you go to basic training, let's say you got 200 people in your class. Out of those 200 people, you might get, I think they said, what's it, like 6% of that class that may actually retire with 20 years.
Really?
I mean, it's a small number, yeah. Because most people get in, they do their 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, whatever it is, and they get out for whatever reason. They may have done the experience, they didn't like it. They did it for the college money. Because depending on your job and what's the Army's needs at that time, you could get upwards of $80,000 for college. So it's just one of those things. Yeah, but I think it's like 6% was actually retired from start to finish. 20 years is like 6% actually retired.
Does the benefits for college extend to your family as well?
So that's something that just changed recently in the last 10 years. Yeah. Yes, it can. Yeah. So you can transfer it to your kids. You can transfer it to your wife. But there's certain obligations. A lot of times they do it so if you do a 3-year contract, right? And then let's say your window opens for you to renegotiate your contract when you're 12 months out. And you say, hey, I want to give my kids my GI Bill or whatever. So then they say, okay, yeah, but you got to do, 5 more years or 6 years or whatever it is. I don't know what the actual time frame is, but there's a certain obligation you have to meet. I want to say it's 6 years. You incur a 6-year more obligation to transfer that money to your kids, which is good.
Is there ability to negotiate that, or is it kind of like, no, like if you want